Hi, I'm Gail Sokol, and on today's show, we're going to be introducing Sourdoughs, a 4-part series.
Welcome to Baking Radio. Learn the art and science of baking with author, educator, and award-winning chef, Gail Sokol. Whether you've been baking your whole life or you're brand new to the world of baking and you're looking to build your confidence and learn new skills in the kitchen, you're in the right place. This is Baking Radio.
On today's show, I'm going to be introducing sourdoughs, and it's going to be a 4-part series. So today, I'm just going to give you a brief introduction. Now, it may not be politically correct to say this, but I'm going to just say it. 3 words. I love bread. And I know there's a lot of no-carb people and low-carb people, but I love bread. I love really good bread. I rarely buy bread because I almost always make my own. In season 1, I did a podcast on fermentation. I talked about what the process of fermentation is and where it is used, mostly for bread bakers and in the wine and beer industries. And those are soaring. To review a bit, the process of fermentation is when yeast, in the presence of sugar, undergoes a reaction. And it's really magical because it creates 2 byproducts, carbon dioxide gas and alcohol. It's the carbon dioxide gas bubbles that get caught within a bread's dough and its stretchy gluten structure. And in the oven, these gas bubbles cause the dough to expand and rise. It's a beautiful thing. All right, I'm getting a little carried away, but it is beautiful. I love it. There are basically 2 categories of bread that you can make. The first is known as a straight dough. Now, I don't know why it's called a straight dough. My interpretation is, in other words, it's pretty straightforward. This is where all the ingredients are mixed together and then left to rise. The dough is then shaped into things like boules or rounds, rolls, baguettes, braids, whatever you want. And then it's allowed to rise again, and then it's baked ultimately in the oven. And it can be good bread too, right? Think about a classic white bread loaf, or a focaccia, or cinnamon rolls. They're delicious, right? I mean, I'm not going to deprive anybody of a straight dough. They're delicious. The other category, just wait for it, is known as a preferment. The word preferment means to ferment before. This means that part of the dough is made using flour, water, and yeast ahead of time, like a small baby dough, and then allowed to rise to give the dough a head start, if you will. The remaining ingredients are then added after the pre-ferment has risen a bit. The amount of time varies depending on how thick the pre-ferment is and the recipe. Typically, it's for several hours and even overnight. There are really 2 types of pre-ferments, sponges and sourdoughs. In a sponge, the dough is made in stages like I just described. Usually a small part of the flour and some water, and sometimes yeast is left to rise for several hours or even overnight. The pre-ferment will get quite puffy, full of gas bubbles, and it can have various names. Maybe you've heard of a biga or a poolish. The consistency can also be thick or thin, again depending upon the recipe. Typically, the thicker the pre-ferment, the slower it rises. And think about it, that makes sense, right? It would take more effort for the carbon dioxide to push up against this heavier, thicker mass, and the gluten matrix needs to stretch. So if it's heavy and dense, it's going to take some time. Now, the thinner it is, the faster it'll rise, because again, it's going to be a thinner gluten matrix because the dough is thinner. The resulting puffy pre-ferment is then used to build the main bread dough by adding other ingredients like more liquid, more flour, and flavorings. The main point here is that the entire pre-ferment, it's used up in the final bread dough. That's the end of the sponge, the end of the story. It's a one-shot wonder. It's used just for that bread that one time. So the purpose of making even this one-shot pre-ferment, why do we do it? It creates lots of flavor. more than just that simple straight dough. It's good, but now it's going to be great. So picture white bread versus an artisan focaccia that used a sponge. So much better. So let's begin to talk about sourdoughs. It's a big subject, and that's why I'm breaking this subject down into a series. Sourdoughs, also called sourdough starters, are also in the second category of breads known as preferments. Sourdoughs are longer lasting, much longer lasting than a sponge, right? That's a one-shot wonder. And they take more of a time commitment, very similar to having a child. You need to attend to the baby and take care of it, or terrible things will happen. And I'm not joking. So the great thing is that once you have gone through all the effort of creating a sourdough starter, you can actually keep it going indefinitely if you take care of it, similar to a child. So you may want to know, if you can make a perfectly respectable loaf of bread using a straight dough, why in the name of bread would you want to commit to making a pre-ferment like a sourdough starter? Like, what's all the fuss? Why do you need to do this? I have better things to do, right? Well, let me tell you. Because making a pre-ferment, and specifically a sourdough, it can change your life. I kid you not. The texture, the crumb, the flavor of a sourdough is without comparison to any other bread on earth. I guarantee you that. The bread tastes so lovely, so complex, much like a well-aged bottle of good wine. This added complexity in a sourdough comes from yeast and bacteria, good bacteria, and they give off byproducts that contain some mild acids, and they give the bread this pleasant, sour taste that is indescribable. So what's involved in making a sourdough? There is some time required, patience and love. See, I told you, it's sort of like being a good parent. You have to be a good parent. I currently have 3 active sourdough starters in my fridge as we speak, the oldest of which is 22 years old. And I'm quite proud of my eldest, since she has earned me some gold medals in many baking competitions. I'm not kidding. So it's absolutely worthwhile to create a sourdough starter. There you have a basic introduction to sourdoughs. On my next show, I'm going to talk about the science of sourdoughs and exactly how they work. Thank you for listening. You can follow me on Facebook, Instagram, my YouTube channel, and my website, chefgailsokol.com.